Want to know why? Ask how. Howard the Humongous. All the noise that's being made about the Iranian nuclear deal or potential Iranian nuclear deal has obscured something very important in the Middle East. There is a war going on in the Middle East. It is spreading. And the Iranian nuclear negotiations are adding fuel to the fire of that war. War in the Middle East, what in the world are you talking about? For the last 4 years, we've been talking about the fact that what is presented to us as a Syrian civil war is not a Syrian civil war at all. It is a sock puppet war. It is a war in which two powers are using proxy armies to battle each other. Those two parties are Iran, which is sponsoring the government of Bashar Assad, the standard government in Syria, and the other are the rebels, who are being sponsored by Saudi Arabia. There is a battle between Saudi Arabia, which is a Sunni power, against Iran, which is a Shiite power, for control of the Middle East and for a slot as a world superpower. But it's not restricted to Syria, where it's killed over 120,000 people so far. Not at all. It's been going on for a very long time in Iraq. Iraq? How does Iraq get into this? It's very simple. Iran, it is said very often in pro-Iranian publications in the United States that the United States has invaded many a country, but Iran has never invaded another country. That's only true technically. Iran doesn't invade other countries with its own land armies. It controls armies in other people's countries. It controls proxy armies. Once upon a time, it appears from all of the evidence, Iran tried for 8 years, this is not just the evidence, this is historical fact, for 8 years, Iran tried to knock Saddam Hussein out of power to take over Iraq as part of the Islamic Revolution. Remember, the Iranian state does not call itself the Islamic Iranian Revolution. It calls itself simply the Islamic Revolution. Why? Because its goals are worldwide. They are not local. And the first country the Iranians thought they'd be able to knock off in 1979, when they started this global revolution that we know as the Iranian Revolution, was the country right next door, Iraq. They spent 8 years and 1 million lives and $1 trillion trying to unseat Saddam Hussein and take over Iraq. It didn't work. So they came up with a better plan. Leak phony weapons, phony information on weapons of mass destruction to the United States. Leak it through a guy named Ahmed Chalabi. And indeed, that's what it appears that the Iranians did. So we followed the Iranian lead. We were deceived by Iranian intelligence. We marched into Iraq. We knocked Saddam Hussein out of power. And slowly but surely, ever since then, the Iranians have been taking over Iraq. Just ask any Iraqi. They will tell you. Iran has been operating through its proxy armies. There are approximately 3 of them right now in Iraq. And within the last week, the Iraqi government has claimed credit for pushing the Islamic State out of Tikrit, the city where Saddam Hussein was born. Well, that wasn't just done by the Iraqi army working alone with some airstrikes from the United States. Not at all. There was a general on the ground. There were boots on the ground. The general was from Iran. His name is Qasem Soleimani. He runs the proxy armies that Iran runs all over the Middle East. It has one called Hamas in Gaza. It has another called Hezbollah that's founded entirely on the principles of the founding father of Iran, of today's modern Islamic revolutionary Iran, the Ayatollah Khomeini. That's called Hezbollah in Lebanon. For all practical purposes, Iran controls Lebanon today. And it runs 3 proxy armies in Iraq. So General Qasem Soleimani has been leading the charge in Tikrit, and his exploits, being there with boots on the ground at a time when the United States is seemingly too cowardly to put boots on the ground, has made him a grand champion. It's been one more step in Iran's absorption of Iraq as a full-fledged province. Meanwhile, the war has spread beyond just Iraq, Lebanon, Gaza, and Syria. It has spread to Yemen. Yemen is the back door to Saudi Arabia. Over here are a bunch of, over on the west of, or the northwest of Saudi Arabia are a bunch of Iranian-controlled territories, and now down to the east and south of Saudi Arabia, there's Yemen. And Iran has been working for years through a group called the Houthis, which is another Shiite group. And that group is trying to do something that's called in international law encirclement. And encirclement is considered a legitimate grounds for war. Who's encircling whom? The Iranians are encircling the Saudis with the Houthi army, its proxy army, taking over in Yemen. That army, as of today, has virtually every major city in Yemen under its control. Who should we be rooting for in this grand battle between Iran and Saudi Arabia? Well, I have bad news. There are no good guys. The Iranians have been benefiting from an upcoming American or an upcoming deal with the P6 on their nuclear weapons, because if money loosens up, if sanctions loosen over the Iranians, they will have a lot of excess cash with which to further fuel their proxy armies all over the Middle East. They are not good guys. The Iranians have been chanting death to the Americans as recently as the last 2 weeks. The Ayatollah, Grand Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, has been making anti-American statements as of the last 2 weeks. We haven't been paying attention. The Iranians have made a giant mock-up of an American aircraft carrier, and they have sunk it with their own missiles, which they've been developing since the 1980s. And which have grown increasingly sophisticated year after year. Weapons, these are rockets with which Iran will soon be able to reach the United States, which, if it has them, with nuclear weapons, nuclear warheads. Iran is not exactly a good guy. I mean, aside from the fact that Iran is the only country in the world that has a national holiday dedicated to the extermination of another state, Israel, dedicated to genocide, Israel. It's, even if you want to join them in wiping out the Israelis, Iran does not represent good news for you. Is Saudi Arabia any better news? Well, Saudi Arabia had its Prince Bandar as an unofficial member of the White House for 25 years. He was considered sort of the fourth member of the Bush family for a long time. Does that make the Saudis our friends? Well, not exactly. The Saudis are our allies. The Saudis help our economy by keeping the price of oil relatively stable on our behalf. But in fact, it's the Saudis who sponsored Al-Qaeda. Now, look, we helped start Al-Qaeda too. We did it as a bunch of freedom fighters fighting in Afghanistan. But it was the Saudis who really were there nurturing Al-Qaeda from the very get-go. The Saudis indirectly are responsible for, and the Gulf Emirates are indirectly responsible for the rise of the Islamic State, ISIS, the most dangerous, hideous, appalling group right now, acting as a scourge on the face of planet Earth. So are the Saudis our friends? Not really. And meanwhile, ISIS is spreading its tentacles across North Africa. So this proxy war between Iran and the Saudis is growing and metamorphizing out of the control of even the Saudis who started a good part of it, or the Iranians who started a good part of it. Where should we stand in the middle of this? We should be cautious, very cautious. We have to try to balance the interests of Iran versus the interests of the Saudis, the interests of the Shiites versus the interests of the Sunnis. Ultimately, we have to favor stability. What have we learned from watching a bunch of dictators fall in what we thought was an Arab Spring? It was the beginning of an Arab winter, that nations like Libya are now in chaos thanks to the Arab Spring. That dictators, if they are the most stable form of government, at least give you certain basic human rights. Most important is the ability to walk to the market in the morning, buy your bread, and walk home when you are finished with your buying trip without being afraid of being ripped apart in the streets by car bombs and suicide bombers, without being afraid that your home will be gone when you arrive home, having been bombed by Bashar Assad's military jets. America should work to the greatest extent possible for stability in the Middle East. The Middle East has no, at least when it comes to the Iranians and the Saudis, has no good guys. This is Howard the Among Us, speaking to you from the future. It's your job and my job to make. Or, want to know why? Ask how. Now for that insidious, seditious, sneaky, sleazy, slimy, impossible to find little off button. I think I've got it.